Thank you. Please allow me to switch to English for the first time in this conference. And first of all, I would like to thank both organizers for inviting me to this wonderful conference. And I hope that my today's presentations on the epigraphic landscape of Epidauros will be of great interest to you. My studies on Epidauros are a part of my bigger project, of which I am a prime investigator. This project is called Inscription in Architectural and Spatial Context, the case study of Greek sanctuaries in central Greece, the Peloponnese, and the Aegean island. This is a project sponsored by the National Science Center in Poland. It's a 4-year project and it's a group project. So apart from me, I have one postdoc who is dealing with one of the case studies explored within this project, and 2 archaeologists who are maintaining the GIS database. The aim of this project is basically a comprehensive and coherent reconstruction of interplay between epigraphic culture and space of the selected sanctuaries. We will explore which categories of inscriptions for which groups of recipients, whether Goths, Romans, Hellenistic kings, local elites, etc., and in which time periods influence local topography the most. And we take the big time span into consideration because we are focusing on inscriptions spanning from the archaic period to the late Roman period. We also want to reveal how inscriptions divided and organized space, investigate how did the spread of the epigraphic landscape introduce movement into the static landscape, because very often to approach some inscriptions, people had to walk through it, walk around the building or the monument upon which these inscriptions were engraved, sometimes crouch or linger on. 2 main research questions are as follow. How did the spread of the epigraphic culture shape and rearrange space? And how did the landscape and the rearrangements of this urban space affected the epigraphic habits? Due to the time limit and the size of the research team, I decided to focus on Greek sanctuaries located in central Greece, and here I selected Thermon as a case study, the Peloponnese with Epidauros and Olympia, and the Aegean island with Kos. And my previous studies on Delphi, Delos, and Amphiarayon at Oropos will be a great reference point for this ongoing project. A choice of the area and sanctuaries for case studies was determined by several parameters. The main one was, of course, the survival of a rich number of epigraphic material, of which the initial setting is known or can be at least established. Second was the archaeological exploration and documentation must have been of sufficient quality to be able to establish the original locations of inscriptions and pattern of changes of the local topography. Then we also wanted to focus on sanctuaries of different levels within the urban hierarchy, so from the major centers like Olympia to more regional ones like Thermon. An effort was also made to select ancient sites that are not overbuilt by modern cities, because that always enable conducting the studies that we are interested in. And lastly, ancient authors were interested in many of the selected sites, and through that literary sources constitutes an important element of the available evidence. We decided to choose Epidauros and Kos because they both hosted famous sanctuaries of Asclepios on their territory, which impacted the local epigraphic habit. And they also both provide us with substantial epigraphic output because we have over 1,200 inscriptions from Epidauros and over 4,000 inscriptions from Kos. Also, the new corpora assure better dating of inscriptions, which is also very important in our studies. Olympia was quite an obvious choice because this was the main sanctuary, one of the main sanctuaries in Greece, and it has also yielded over 1,000 texts spanning from the archaic times to the Roman period. Moreover, the territory of Olympia is not overbuilt by any modern city, which offers a new level of spatial analysis, which is capable of engaging with the vast array of epigraphic material. and of unraveling the complex ways in which inscriptions interacted with their physical space. Thermon is a great reference point for my previous studies on Delphi, because the epigraphic record of the meeting place of the League of the Aetolians shows a predominance of abbreviated decrees, similar to the one found at Delphi. Moreover, publishing in documents in Delphi in the 3rd century BCE, so during the Aetolian dominance over the sanctuary of Delphi, the League adopted the Delphic publishing style and inscribed its decrees on building walls, while at Thermon, the Aetolians placed their decrees almost exclusively on the freestanding stelae, following the local custom. All selected to this project case studies supplement my research on Delphi Amphiaryon at Oropos and Delos, and I hope will allow us to investigate inscriptions in both architectural and spatial context in Greek sanctuaries in central Greece, the Peloponnese, and the Aegean Islands. And today I would like to present you my research on Epidauros. This is still work in progress, so I'm open to all of your comments and suggestions to both our methods and or the results of these methods. Epidauros is located in the East Peloponnese on the Argolid Peninsula. It is most famous for its sanctuary of Asclepios, located about 6 kilometers from the city. The earliest volume of Greek inscription, Corpus Inscriptionum Graecarum, revealed only 29 inscriptions from Epidauros. However, in time, new texts were discovered. The breakthrough were the excavations led by Cavadias, whose bust you can see on the photo below. This bust comes from is situated in front of the Museum of Epidauros at the moment. And these excavations held at the end of the 19th and early 20th century brought a lot of new epigraphic material, which was first published in the 4th volume of IG. However, this volume was still incomplete because still new inscriptions were unearthed, and then 27 years later, there was a second edition of IG. However, again, still incomplete because, as Werner Peck later stated, Hiller, who was the main editor of this volume, had only 10 weeks to prepare this volume, to spend time in Epidauros, so it was not enough time to do all the work, and he was moreover 70 years old already, so he was no longer able to read and find all the inscriptions, according to Peck. So in the 1960s, the privilege of investigated inscriptions from Epidauros was granted to Werner Peck, who spent a lot of time in Epidauros. He provided lots of new inventory numbers for already existing inscriptions. He provided us with the new reading of some older text, and he actually created the whole epigraphic room in the museum in Epidauros. And his work resulted in 2 volumes of inscriptions from Epidauros, Inschriften aus dem Asklepion von Epidauros and Neue Inschriften aus Epidauros. And based on this volume of inscriptions, I was able to establish the number of published inscriptions from Epidauros to 1,207 inscriptions. And by inscriptions from Epidauros, I refer to inscriptions from the city of Epidauros, from the Asclepion, and a nearby sanctuary of Apollo Maleatas. The vast majority of this inscription was published in the 2nd edition of the IG, number 4, and they also come from the volumes I have already mentioned. But here I want to acknowledge the new publication of Petrounakos from 2015. This is his PhD dissertation published, and he collected and published all inscriptions from the theater of Epidauros, not the main one from the Asclepion, but the small theater that you can still see in near the city of Epidauros. And he found 216 inscribed seats from the theater and published it. The last 85 inscriptions comes from new publications, mostly in SCG, but also in other books and journals. For my studies, very important are the categories of these inscriptions. So not surprisingly, the main category are dedications, and this it includes also votive inscriptions and altars, which are very characteristic for the Epidaurian epigraphic landscape. Then inscribed theatre seats, tituli honorari rank second on this list. Surprisingly, only 61 epitaphs, but this is due to the fact, the small number is due to the fact that, to my knowledge, the main cemeteries has not been unearthed yet. And here, if we compare this number of epitaphs from Kos, from where we have over 4,000 inscriptions and half of them are epitaphs, so this will be quite interesting case studies to compare. Building accounts are a very important category because very often we know the prime location of this, or we can establish the prime location of these inscriptions. Only 39 decrees, then manumission inscriptions, instrumenta domestica, hymn, horoi, and other, and among other I include artist signatures, letter, arbitrations, law, catalogs, and so on. Luckily, only 17 inscriptions are too fragmentary to provide any type or any category. So this is quite good results of the research. If it comes to the dating of these inscriptions, 82% of all inscriptions can be provided with any kind of date. 76% can be dated to a century or to a break of a century. 5 can be dated only as a Hellenistic text, 38 as a Roman text, and there is a substantial number of inscriptions that are dated by the editors to the quite long time span from the 6th to the 1st century BCE. So they are not very useful in my studies, but luckily only 18% are undated, which is quite nice if we compare it to other cities and sanctuaries in Greece. The earliest text with the secure date comes from the first half of the 5th century. However, we have a substantial number of dedications dated by the editors to the late 6th, early 5th century BCE. And the latest texts are from the mid-4th century CE, so you can see that this time span of the epigraphic habit of Epidauros is quite long. And here is the table with all the dated texts, first to the centuries and then to the break of the centuries. And here I had, I wonder what to do with this text dated to a break of a century, how to assign them to a specific century, because I didn't want to omit them, because this is a quite substantial number of inscription. So I decided to apply two methods. First, I decided to divide equally these inscriptions from the break of the century to each century. But then I realized that, especially in this first break of the centuries, there is much bigger probability that these inscriptions comes from the 5th century rather than the 6th century, or at least the majority of these inscriptions would come from the 5th century than from the 6th century. So I tried another method doing this by percentages. And here are the results of this research, which you can see that whichever methods we applied, they are quite similar, with one distinction with the beginning of the epigraphic habit, because we must always bear in mind that it might have started already in the late 6th century rather than in the early 5th century BCE. And this graph actually perfectly demonstrates the history of Epidauros, because we can see that the beginning of the epigraphic activity started in the late 6th, early 5th century BCE. The greatest peak in the 4th century BCE, so along with this whole building, the monumentalizations and the building program that took place in Epidauros. Also still a very active epigraphic activity in the 3rd century. Then the decline in the next century, which was the result of the historical implications in the area, all the wars that took place over there, especially the Mithridatic wars, then the Sulla wars, and so on. And we have another peak in the 2nd century CE, so which can be associated with another building activity in Epidauros. and with the big activity of the local elites in the 2nd and the 3rd century CE. For my studies, the most important are inscriptions of which initial setting we know, and how we can establish these initial settings of inscriptions. Well, some inscriptions are certain, their initial setting is certain. There are, first of all, inscriptions found in situ, like topoi inscribed on the theater seats, manumissions from the steps of the stadium. Also, sometimes the content of inscriptions tells us directly where these inscriptions were to be set up, like honorific decrees sometimes tells us directly where they were about to be set up within the sanctuary, or they sometimes mention the location of statues granted within the honorific decrees. Also, horoi points us to where they were supposed to be located. Also, other sources can be useful in this respect. For instance, Plutarch tells us where the healing inscriptions were located in Epidauros, or some dedications. Also, the context of inscriptions, but this is rather probable than most certain assigning of the setting of inscriptions, because lots of building inscriptions were found near the buildings or near the constructions that refer to. So I decided to test the hypothesis that most of building inscriptions were located in the area of the buildings that they actually refer to. We can also assume that epitaphs comes from the city, because it was forbidden to bury people within the temenos of any sanctuaries. And also dedications found in the area of the sanctuary of Apollo Malatas. Dedications found there and dedicated to Apollo Malatas, we can be pretty sure that they also comes from this sanctuary. I struggle with some dedications and their contexts, because when we have dedications to Aphrodite, and we know that there was only one sanctuary of Aphrodite in Epidauros, I'm still not sure if I can assume that they came from this area, or if this is too risky. So this is something the question I leave open, and I didn't include them in my calculations yet. So we can proceed now to the epigraphic landscape of Epidauros, the big picture. And by the big picture, I mean 3 main areas of Epidauros, so the city of Epidauros, the sanctuary of Asclepios, and the sanctuary of Apollo Malatas, which was located east of the Asclepion on Mount Kenortion. And here we can assign 40% of inscriptions to the specific location. So it could be bigger number, but it's still not bad, I think. So first is the sanctuary of Apollo of Malatas, with 38 inscriptions located there. There are all dedications found there, and most probably from there, because there are dedications to Apollo Malatas or to the Muses, and we know that the sanctuary of the Muses was located within the temenos of Apollo Malatas sanctuary. 25 of these texts can be dated, 13 remain undated. The earliest text comes from the 2nd quarter of the 5th century BCE, and the latest from the early 4th century CE. Then we have the city of Epidauros with 281 inscriptions. There are mostly theater seats, but also some inscriptions, dedications came from the temple of Dionysus, the temple of Hera, cemeteries, and agora, because we have 2 horoi from the agora. 182 texts are dated, 99 remain undated. This is mostly due to the epitaphs. The earliest text comes from the late 6th, early 5th century BCE, and the latest from the 3rd century CE. So again, we have this very long time span of inscriptions from the city of Epidauros, similar to the one from the sanctuary of Apollo Malatas. The most interesting are inscriptions originating from the Asclepion, because we have 156 inscriptions, and 62 can be inscribed only as the one that coming from the temenos of the Asclepion without any further location. However, 94 texts can be precisely located on the map of the sanctuary of Asclepios. And here we have 26 manumissions from the stadium, 16 dedications and tituli honorari located in the area around the building K, 7 building accounts and dedications from the temple of Artemis, 7 hymns from the Hestatrion. We know that 6 tituli honorari were located along the sacred way. 7 healing inscriptions and hymns were engraved on the walls of the Abaton. 5 dedications comes from the area of the building E. 4 dedications from the temple of Asclepios and Apollo Malatas. 3 building accounts refer to the construction of the Tolos. 2 dedications concern the temple P, and 11 inscriptions point to other minor locations. Luckily, almost all of these texts are dated. The earliest comes from the turn of the 5th and the 4th century BCE, while the latest from the 4th century CE. And now, having all this data collected in a database, so dividing these inscriptions into category, dates, their original setting, we're also interested in the character of inscriptions, whether they were private or public text. We can now proceed to the next step, so we can leave the big picture in order to start working on the narrow picture of the epigraphic landscape of Epidauros, using the so-called the deep mapping approach in order to understand the dynamics of the spatial arrangement of the epigraphic habit in Epidauros, and we are simultaneously doing the same research for Kos, and we're trying to compare these results, and later we will apply the same methods to other case studies. And I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with this approach, this concept of deep mapping. This is basically the concept that emerged out of the psychogeographical experiments held in France back in 1960s. A deep mapping methodology allows to combine quantitative and qualitative data about a space or a place with the purpose of building a spatial narrative. A deep map is basically a map with the greater information than a two-dimensional map of places, names, and topography. And we decided also to use the geographic information system to proceed with our research, which makes possible to integrate and visualize different data within the same geography. GIS allows to see the relationship between the data and space, and this gives us a basis for looking into ways that human actions are tied to places and how they overlap and accumulate over time. The first step of preparing this kind of deep mapping was to identify the chronology, the typology, and the placement of inscriptions. And we decided to focus on centuries rather than bigger periods of time or quarter centuries, because our data are much more suitable to categorize them into centuries. And then we identify the chronology and typology of buildings and structures located within the investigated area. And this phase is finished by now. Then the second step was that the data was collected in spreadsheets, which can be imported into GIS. This phase is also finished. And now we are in the moment of the third step, which is getting the main plans georeference in GIS. To do so, we use the archaeological reports to identify construction phases. And in Epidauros, I think we will focus on 4 or 5 construction phases. The first will be before the 4th century BCE. The second will be after this big building program in Epidauros. Then probably we will also focus on the late Hellenistic and maybe early Roman period. And then after the 2nd century CE, so after this second big building program in Epidauros. And this is still a work in project. This is something which is done by my 2 archaeologists of my team, because since I'm not an archaeologist myself, I'm an epigraphist and historian, so I was much more involved and actually interested in these first two phases. But after this third phase is finished and all the data are already in a GIS, we can run a comprehensive analysis, look for the relationship between inscriptions, statues, buildings, and people over time and space. And we can begin the reconstruction of interplay between epigraphic culture and public space, see how inscriptions organize and arrange space in different periods, so you can actually return to our main research questions. And here at the end, I just want to show you the results of the project run by Christina Williamson. The project is entitled The Deep Mapping Sanctuaries, Mapping Experiences at Festival Hubs in the Late Hellenistic World. Christina is doing her research, for instance, on the sanctuary of Asclepios in Pergamon, which will be a great reference point for our research and very stimulating. She is not only focusing on inscriptions, but to her databases, she also includes all the artifacts that are left by the people actions in Pergamon, in the sanctuary of Asclepios in Pergamon, because she also includes pottery, clay, coins, literary sources, and she's combining all this data together. So this is something that is really interesting for us, and I hope our project will supplement each other. And thank you. That's all what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation and your control of time that helped us gain some, retrieve some of our delay. So, are there questions in the room? Yes? Do I need the microphone? I think it's better also for the online.
Thank you. First of all, let me tell you that I'm jealous, because as I'm sure most of our colleagues who work on less traveled areas will tell you that 40% is a lot. Yes. For knowing the location of where the inscription originally stood. Just a clarification question. When you say 40%, you mean 40% specific location or 40% Temple of Apollo Maleatas in general?
For 40% in general.
In general.
We did these
okay.
three main research areas, but I think the number of that will be included in this narrow picture won't be much smaller, to be honest.
And a follow-up question, apart from the inscriptions found in situ, do you have a number or an estimate of inscriptions not found in situ, but of which you know the precise location, above the lintel or above the door frame and so on, and how? Thank you.
Well, here the literary sources provide us with some information about that. Also, as I mentioned, that some decrees that were not found in situ, but they tell us in the text of the decree where they used to stand. Like the building inscriptions, there were almost none of them only a few of them were found in situ, well, in the area of the building that they referred to, so we can assume that they were located there, and this is how I assume, because we're not certain, I assume that all these other building inscriptions must have been set up or stand in the area of the buildings that they refer to. Also, some old altars were found in situ, and there is actually a path and the great studies by American scientists, which name I can't remember, who also found some inscriptions in situ, and the older reports refer to some inscriptions. So some of them were found in situ, but some of them we can establish the prime location.
Thank you. I was also struck by this number of 40%. It's already a lot compared to so many other sanctuaries. Yeah, it is quite a lot, but just bear in mind that my previous research focused on Delphi, where the number is still much higher. Of course. Speaking of Delphi, how do you see your project in relationship with sometimes existing GIS projects in the same sites? Are you planning at some point to to kind of build your project into those existing GISs? Or I'm not so familiar with Epidauros, but I can assume that, for instance, in Olympia, there must be also attempts already on localizing inscriptions and maybe mapping them on
so we'll first of all compare our methods, what they are interested in and what we will be interested in, because you also have to bear in mind the phases that you are focusing on, the types of sources you incorporate into these databases. So yeah, it will be nice to compare, because in her project, Christina Williamson also has Asclepion in COS. So this will be interesting to compare with her research, incorporating also other sources, not only inscriptions, to see how this will work.
Thank you. And so, if there is no... Oh, sorry, pardon.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Maybe I didn't understand. How will you deal with the 3D informations of the inscription? I mean, the heights of the letters, maybe the fact that some of the manumissions inscription, they are written on seats, so they are not. Some of them are big, some of them are small, near to the ground. Is that a criteria for you?
This is actually an interesting question, because I haven't thought about the letters, the size of the letter yet. But yeah, I think there will be some kind of category that we can take into account in the GIS databases. So
just to consider that one inscription is not any inscription. Maybe there are some specificities.
Yeah, that's actually a good question, and I need to think about it a little bit more. Yeah, because I'm not an expert in the GIS database. I have my two archaeologists doing that, so I will point them this to bear in mind this kind of factor. But we are also focusing on the type of the media, so the type of the stone upon which this inscription was engraved, so taking into account also the size of the letters will be another interesting factor.